Welcome to the One in the Many. My name is Arshak Benlian. My purpose with the One in the Many podcast is to explore the process of integration as developmentally formative and therapeutically corrective factor in human psychology. The One in the Many is the study of how conscious life differentiates identity, integrates relation, regulates itself under constraint, and sustains direction through time. Subscribe to the One in the Many podcast and connect with me by writing to abenlian@oneinthemany.net. As civilized life on Earth advanced, prolonging the human lifespan and increasing wealth, social existence grew increasingly complex. Stratification, once overt and sharply defined in simpler, less sophisticated societies, has become more intricate, diffuse, and often concealed under the surface of modern life. In this episode, we explore the development of social stratification with a focus on both personal and professional relationships, and seek to illuminate the content and methods by which we utilize our associations with others to shape our identity and navigate our roles. We'll examine the evolving basis of stratification, ability, ethnicity, culture, and sense of life, and how these elements guide the identification of others in our personal networks and professional environments. What traits do we instinctively or consciously seek in others? Traits that reflect, complement, or challenge our personality, values, or ambitions. What drives the attraction or repulsion we feel in social interaction? At what point do our emotional, cultural, and professional connections begin to coincide, intertwine, or even redefine one another? This investigation is not merely sociological, it is also philosophical and psychological. It asks how the self forms and differentiates within the complex social matrix of a stratified world, and how this evolving network of relations reflects back upon the formation of selfhood and the actualization of value in the modern world. So let's go over a brief history of stratification, or rather the historical arc of stratification. In tribal societies, stratification was rooted primarily in kinship, strength, and proximity to survival. Roles were clearly defined: hunter, gatherer, elder, healer. Identity was inherited as much as it was earned. Relational bonds were immediate and vital, based on direct contribution to the group's existence. Recognition was personal and face-to-face. Life was transparent and interdependent. As societies grew into agricultural and feudal systems, stratification became more formalized and rigid. Hierarchies emerged, not only from ability or age, but from birthright, land ownership, and religious sanction. Status became codified. One's role in society was fixed by external institutions, and mobility was rare. In this context, relationships were often functional before they were personal, defined by class and duty rather than by mutual understanding or chosen affinity. The industrial era brought dramatic upheaval. With it came urbanization, professional specialization, and wage labor. Stratification shifted toward wealth, education, and occupational prestige. Social identity became more fluid, but also more fragmented. Individuals were now identified less by their lineage and more by their function in the productive machine. Relational bonds grew thinner but more varied, ranging from utilitarian contracts to elective affinities. In the digital and post-industrial age, the lines of stratification blur and multiply. Social class persists, but intersects with cultural capital, technological literacy, and ideological orientation. Today, people may be grouped or self-identify based on their values, aesthetics, beliefs, and online affiliations more than on traditional markers of wealth or power. Stratification has become subtle, psychological, and networked. Yet, at its core, the human need to recognize and be recognized, to understand and be understood, remains unchanged. At every stage of development, the individual seeks integration, a sense of unity within oneself and with one's environment. Social interaction becomes a medium through which the self both discovers and constructs itself. To encounter another is not merely to observe a different person, it is to experience a reflection, contrast, or extension of oneself. From this perspective, stratification is not only a sociological phenomenon, but a psychological necessity. We evaluate others, often unconsciously, through filters that reflect our internal structure, temperament, values, aspirations, and fears. We are drawn to what resonates, repelled by what contradicts, and intrigued by what transcends our current understanding. Traits such as competence, reliability, humor, elegance, conviction, and vitality function as signals. They form the criteria by which we stratify not only others, but also our own inner world. The friends we choose, the mentors we seek, the partners we desire, and the colleagues we admire all serve to reinforce or challenge our evolving self-concept. Thus, personal and professional relationships are not separate spheres, but interconnected dimensions of psychological development. The professional realm often demands functional alignment. The personal realm seeks emotional resonance. Yet both involve a recursive process of projection, reflection, and integration. The deeper philosophical question at the root of stratification is what constitutes the self in relation to others? If we define selfhood not as a static entity, but as an evolving system of integrations, values organized into a hierarchy, aspirations tied to actions, and emotions grounded in reason, then every human relationship is a test and a mirror of our inner architecture. The one-in-the-many framework posits that all human cognition and connection proceeds through integration. Stratification from this lens is the consequence of differentiated integrations, different people having reached different stages and levels of internal coherence. One individual may live primarily through sensation, another through habit, another through principle. Their capacities to relate and the depths at which those relations occur are stratified accordingly. Stratification, then, is not merely about power or privilege. It is about purpose. It reflects the degree of order and direction within the individual's life. Those who are deeply integrated tend to forge fewer but more meaningful bonds. Those whose lives are fragmented often gravitate toward crowds, ideologies, or surface-level roles to compensate for their lack of inner unity. In the modern world, social stratification is no longer solely defined by material status, geography, or institutional role. The digital revolution has fractured the social landscape into overlapping micro-worlds, forums, platforms, ideologies, networks, each with its own internal logic of status, recognition, and belonging. Online platforms, for instance, stratify users not only by followers, count, or algorithmic visibility, but by inferred values and aesthetic signals. One's digital persona, curated through style, language, humor, or ideological alignment, becomes a surrogate for deeper relational cues. The influencer model embodies this new mode of stratification. Charisma and relevance outstrip depth and integrity, and short-term attention is mistaken for long-term value. Professional networks, meanwhile, stratify according to competence, credibility, and connectivity. Credentials and affiliations serve as proxies for trust. Yet even here, increasingly, cultural fit, a synthesis of shared values, energy, and sensibility, becomes a critical factor. A high-performing individual may still be excluded from a team or community if their way of being does not integrate well with the group's ethos. Cultural tribes form around more abstract qualities, shared traumas, shared aspirations, or shared enemies. In such cases, stratification becomes moral or existential. Belonging requires alignment not only in practice but in posture, a publicly performed identity that signals membership. The irony of the modern world is that even anti-elitist movements often generate their own elite, those most faithful to the group's internal logic or most performative in its rituals. Yet beneath these complexities lies a persistent truth. The quality of a society depends on the quality of its integrations, not its uniformity, but the coherence between levels of thought, value, and action. Stratification is natural and inevitable. The danger lies not in its existence, but in mistaking hierarchy of popularity or noise for hierarchy of depth, character, or contribution. Recognizing the layered structure of human relationships and one's own position within them is not just an intellectual exercise. It has profound developmental and therapeutic significance. A psychologically integrated individual begins to see stratification not as a threat or injustice, but as a map. The people we attract, repel, idealize, or ignore offer crucial insight into our inner world. Why do we feel inferior in one group, superior in another? Why do we fear intimacy with some, but over-identify with others? Every reaction is a clue. From a developmental perspective, maturity involves differentiating one's relations, understanding which associations serve functional needs, which nourish emotional life, which stimulate growth, and which diminish or fragment the self. This clarity allows the individual to prioritize depth over breadth, resonance over status, seeking fewer but more integrated connections. In psychotherapy, this insight becomes a tool of transformation. A client's pattern of relationships often mirrors their level of psychological integration. Disproportionate dependency, chronic alienation, repeated conflict, or shallow alliances can all signal disintegration in the self. Therapy can uncover the unconscious principles guiding relational choices, many of which were inherited or formed under duress, and bring them into conscious reformulation. Moreover, by re-stratifying one's social field, choosing who to include, exclude, or re-engage, an individual can rebuild the architecture of their life. Each healthy, integrated connection becomes a reinforcing structure. As the inner hierarchy of values becomes more refined, so does the outer hierarchy of relations. Ultimately, to relate authentically requires both strength and discernment. Not all connections are equal, and not all people are equal ready for depth. Integration involves accepting the stratification of readiness in ourselves and others, while remaining open to the possibility of growth. This balance of discernment and generosity is the essence of relational maturity. Human relations are not flat. They are structured, layered, and dynamic, reflecting the ever-unfolding development of the self and the society in which he or she lives. Stratification, often viewed as a marker of inequality or expulsion, is more fundamentally a reflection of differentiation, of purpose, character, values, and vision. From the tribal campfire to the global digital village, the evolution of society mirrors the evolution of individual consciousness. As the self grows, so too does its capacity to discern, to see others not merely as roles, functions, or affinities, but as a distinct integrations of life. Each person we encounter represents a degree of wholeness, fragmentation, or potential. How we respond, what we admire, avoid, challenge, or love, reveals the architecture of our own soul. To stratify, in its deepest form, is not to judge arbitrarily. It is to recognize degrees of integration in ourselves and others. The more integrated we become, the more precisely we can relate, choosing when to lead, when to learn, when to serve, when to challenge, and when to part ways. Relational depth requires both openness and order, receptivity and principle. It is not blind inclusion, but purposeful connection. This is the essence of the one in the many, to discover unity not in sameness, but in meaningful differentiation. We do not transcend stratification by abolishing it, we transcend it by elevating its standard, judging not by accident of birth, wealth, or status, but by the degree to which one has integrated life into purpose, value into action, and self into relation. In the end, we are who we are is inseparable from how and with whom we choose to relate. To live well is not merely to rise in a social structure, but to rise in relational coherence, to bring our personal, professional, emotional, and philosophical selves into an integrated whole, and to honor that same possibility in others. In this light, stratification becomes not a wall, but a path, a scaffold upon which the self climbs toward deeper authenticity, finer discernment, and more enduring connection. This is the one in the many. The principle of life is the process of integration from a single cell to an ideal human being. The story of life unfolds through integration, from a single percept to a library of knowledge. Through virtue, reason, honesty, independence, selfishness, productivity, you set your values, purpose, to achieve self-esteem and happiness. Through time and energy, from induction to integration to reduction, the smallest particle unifies matter, and the highest purpose unifies your life. You, the one in the many, matter. May you integrate your life with value-driven days.